Hello, my name is Mieli and this is a Mind of a Man podcast. And today I have a special guest from our Swedish neighbor country, Rickhard Svensson. And sorry if I'm butchering your name.
No worries.
Welcome.
Kiitos.
And me and Rickhard, we met a couple of years ago, first time in European Men Gathering in Denmark, and last year as well. And I will let Rickhard do the introduction. So who are you and what do you do?
Well, thank you very much, William, for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here. As you mentioned, we met, I think it's 2 years ago at the EMG in Denmark in 2020. In my private life, I work as a marketing and sales director for a fintech company called Cool Company. And I've been working within marketing for the last 15 years. I'm a father of two. I have two teenage kids. They turn 16 and 17. And apart from that, I'm right now in the process of getting married and moving together with my fiance, who's actually from the States. So we have a lot going on at the moment, but it's very nice. It's very all positive, very positive.
And you're also not working in the army, or you are?
Yes, that is correct. I'm part of the what's called the Swedish Home Guard. So you have like 4 branches in the Swedish military. So it's the Marine, it's the Army, the Air Force, and then it's the Home Guard. So the Home Guard is, what do you call it, like the first line of defense in case for an invasion or a military force coming to our country. And our purpose is to protect harbors and important warehouses, etc., but also, and increasingly important, to use guerrilla warfare tactics, such as been seen now in Ukraine, but even more importantly during the winter wars in your history with Russia, and use those tactics against an invading enemy. So that's what we do in practice, and I think we have about 8 or 9 days that are by contract each year, but my what's called company or platoon, we have an additional 6 times a year. So it's eight times a year. So almost every month we're out practicing for what we hope won't come, so to say.
And you're also practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Are you doing it yourself or competing or just?
No, I've been actually practicing it for almost, 18 years now. I started just before I turned 25. So back in 2004, 2005, I started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And back then it was quite uncommon. And I've been doing it since, and I've been competing quite a lot. Now I'm definitely becoming older. I'm 42 already. So I'm not competing at the sort of any high levels, but now every now and then I compete in my sort of old age span. So you have different brackets depending on your weight, but also depending on what sort of experience you have and also age. So I feel I have more to sort of to compete with when I'm within guys that are about my same age. Having a 25-year-old who's been doing jiu-jitsu since they were 10, it's becoming increasingly difficult to master. But it's a very giving and rewarding form of working out, at least for me, as it sort of provides both agility but also power, and more importantly that sort of combat that you don't get on a daily basis, but you can get in a controlled environment without necessarily punching each other out, so to say.
And did you say that your daughter was competing as well?
Yes, that is correct. My daughter's actually, I was down in Crete 2 weeks ago with my daughter. She's competing in the Swedish national team for what's called sport jiu-jitsu. So it's jiu-jitsu, but it's all I'm doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu, just to clear the distinction. Brazilian jiu-jitsu is very much based on the ground, while traditional jiu-jitsu and what she's doing sport jiu-jitsu is all from standing, kick, box, doing throws, and then while on the ground they continue with the wrestling part, or nevasa as it's called. And yeah, well, she's one of those that has been doing it for almost, she's now turned 17 and she's been doing it already for 10 years. So it's quite, it's very interesting and fun to see how the movement and patterns are so different from someone who's been learning it from a very early age. So it's and of course, as a proud dad, I'm very much supportive on the stance.
And so one more thing, you're doing also this men's work thing. So could you tell me about that? How did you end up doing that? Because that's where we met.
Yeah, exactly. I was invited in 2020 to host a workshop based on very much on what the workshop was called boot camp. And the idea was to really push men through a physical challenge, a physical experience, because what often is when people think of physical experiences that it's exhausting, but what people don't think about is that when you reach a certain point of physical exhaustion, it's very much about the mental space as well, and to keep one's posture through that mental space. So that's what I was doing. And then last year at the European Men's Gathering, me and my colleague Christian Iversen, who's also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, we were in charge of the full Friday schedule, where we really dwelled even deeper into the sort of physical and emotional challenges that comes with like both hard physical strain, but also we're trying to push them to their mental borders during that day. And I think, well, for the people who experienced it, it really took them through a journey where we tried to take them to the sort of symbolic underworld, where they really have to dig into themselves and then come together as a group to face the challenges. And we're going to do that this year again. Of course, we're going to change a lot, so to keep people at their toes, but really sort of let men get back to their bodies, get back to that sort of underworld where they can find more energy than they probably thought they could have.
So that's some kind of a rites of passage ritual.
Yes, correct. And I think for me at least, I did my military service back when I was 20 years old. So that's 22 years ago. And to me, that was to me, it was a definition of the rites of passage, where you have to go through struggle and adversity, but you do it together with other men in a group. And I think now in hindsight, I still have contact with those people. And in hindsight, I see that was, for me, going from a boy to beginning to be a man, because you're still 20 years old, so there's still so much ahead of you, but to understand where my limits were, how to take care of myself, and also how to be there for others, but also to rely on others to be there for me. So I think that was a very, very good sort of experience that I think and hope more and more men or boys that will become men can go through, especially now as things in the world are starting to change for the worse in some aspects.
So how many people, what's the percentage in Sweden that how many men do go through the military service?
I remember back when I did it, it was mandatory. Everyone had to at least be drafted. And then I don't know how big a percentage that eventually then did the military service, but everyone at least was drafted. And then I think it was like back in 2010, maybe it was, they completely shut that down to only have a professional army. So people who were just working full time. And I do believe that was a very bad decision, not only from a financial point of view, like having all these military bases and so on just sort of put to waste, but also in terms of, this rites of passage, because men at that age need to find a way to connect to themselves, but also to others that they wouldn't have if they weren't in that situation. Again, you're being put through very straining conditions that in a society like today, where we don't have to push ourselves really, we're pretty much in front of a computer all day if we want to. We don't get to experience that, and we don't get to know ourselves during hard times. So knowing oneself and how one reacts under extreme pressure, extreme stress, is part of growing up and being mature, and also eventually being a man. And I think that's now, as things are progressing outside in the world, now it's becoming mandatory. It has become mandatory since I think 2 years ago, but now they're increasingly stepping it up. So I think whether it's this year or next year, I think everyone will be drafted. Then again, how many will actually do it? And I'm not sure. I think at the height, I think it was like 80,000 per year or something like that did it, like 20 years old. Now I think we're down to like 10 or something. So we're still not close to what we once were, but they're gradually increasing it, so to say.
So do you see the difference in when you are looking at the Swedish, let's say, landscape for Swedish people, that so not so many young men have gone through this process? So have you seen that there's
absolutely yeah. No, I think what I definitely see is this sort of Peter Pan syndrome, this sort of where you never want to grow up. You still believe that you have all the choices, even though time passes by. You think that you can still again have fun, you know. But the truth of the matter is that once you turn 25, you need to have a plan. Once you turn 30, well, then you have to be starting to really think hard about getting a family. And if you haven't, well, you won't be chosen. I'm, of course, making very exaggerated statements here, but I think a lot of men think that they haven't pushed themselves enough to grow up. So instead, they become eternal boys, so to say.
So can you tell me what you think that this whole process, this rite of passage is? Why is it so important that men go through this process?
I think it's sorry. Yeah, continue. Sorry.
I mean that the going through military service is one type of rites of passage, but of course there's different kinds of processes. That what is that?
Absolutely.
Can you describe that?
I think it's very much about being reflected by other men, and also be appreciative for what that you bring to the group, so to say. Again, like by definition, you will fail along that rites of passage, and understand that making yourself vulnerable, but also sort of allowing yourself to be vulnerable around other men in extreme positions is part of letting go of that boy that you have, and then once being vulnerable, stepping up as a man and accepting your flaws, accepting your lacks, and then taking the measures to sort of bridge those to being, but okay, I'm not complete, but I will do my very best to sort of step up to the responsibilities that are laid upon me. And then doing it within a group of men, you take away a lot of the dimension and polarity that you have between men and women, of course, and then it's only among men. And having, especially if you have older men in the military service, you have your officers, of course, but in rites of passage, in another setting, like it's important to have elder men as well as sort of validators of the passage itself, because another boy can't validate a boy to become a man. Other men need to do that. So to sort of say that, okay, we see that you are on the right path, or that we see that you are making an effort to become a man. So that, again, I think it's very much about taking that responsibility for yourself, leading yourself. And then once you can do that, then you can help and also lead others.
And you said something about the Peter Pan phenomenon. I think that's a very really important part of that. That Peter Pan is full of potential, which is like good when you are a child. But when you are a man, you need to be something specific, because you cannot be everything. So that's kind of you have to go through this process of from this vastness of potential to something specific. And that's happens through that rites of passage process with help of other men and help of older men who can like pinpoint your gifts somehow, that you are gifted and we can see this gifted in you and you should use that so you can find your place in the society or among other men.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good sort of summary of it, and especially finding your own limits, which in the military service is very clear. Like after, I think I remember when I did my sort of we had green berets, and to earn that green beret you had to go through certain tests, and one was you had to go for a full day, so 100 hours without sleep, and then it was a sort of simulation of war the whole time. So by my physical and mental space was definitely defined in how much can I actually sort of push myself to. There are other ways of doing that, of course, but finding your limits, because again, then you realize that you are not full of potential. there's an end to the potentiality, so to say.
And I love that kind of that's kind of killing the naivety of a child. Exactly. That, like, you are not full of potential. But I would like to also look at this other aspect, that because I have been thinking a lot of these rites of passage, and because I didn't go through military service, and well, I wasn't able to, and there's a whole big story because in Finland it's mandatory.
Right.
And I kind of realized that I have been searching for this kind of similar process, and I have found it in later years in my life. But also this topic of what happens when you are a kid, and this rites of passage from teenager to a man. So for me, that one really important part is really biological, that when you transition from a boy to man, there is a couple of things that are important that happens. And one is that you get power, like physical power, that you have a power to hurt other people and also to protect. But that's one thing. And another thing is that you have a sexuality which is rising, that you can produce a child. So that's two things that we need to, as a society, we need to put in a box, because you just cannot go there and hurt other people, and just cannot go there and rape women.
No,
and exactly. I'm not saying that that's like that men do it, but it's kind of the potentiality for that we need to kind of have in some kind of a container. So could you talk about a little bit about this, that kind of this inner urges, they rise up and the physical potentiality comes up, and then we have to do something about that?
Yeah, I actually brought it up at the European Men's Gathering last year, is that as a man, you can never create life. Like, women give birth. Men can't give birth. But what we can do is we can create or destruct outside of ourselves. And I use, and probably others before me, used the analogy of a fire. Because fire can be extremely dangerous, but without it, we wouldn't be able to survive. And then looking at, as a man, like the same sort of fire that you have within you, that same sort of male potential of creation is what both have created, like sent people to the moon, but has also, created like genocide, nuclear bombs, etc., etc. And if you're not, if you can connect to that creative or destructive energy, because there are two sides of the same coin, you will either be eaten by it, in the sense of like a fire without control becomes a forest fire and kills everything within itself. And as you mentioned, a teenage boy without limits will be a disaster for all of society. Like, and especially if they pack up in groups, whether they're hooligans or criminal gangs. But at the same time, if you are not able to nurture that fire, it becomes sort of passive aggressive smoke that sort of goes toward inwards, but also sort of pollutes the air around you. So trying to connect to that creative or destructive energy is so important for a man. in that age, and learning how to use it for something creative or constructive rather, because without it, and that's where you need older men to say like, this is what you're good at, and this is what you need to think of, or you need to limit yourself, because again, now this fire is getting out of control. So yeah, going back to the rites of passage, that's where really like you learn how to, okay, limit that fire, so to say.
And the rites of passage happens, well, it used to happen in every society. It was a kind of, if you go and look at the ancient societies, there was always some sort of rites of passage. And I love it, that kind of, that if we go really like in the basics of that like with the sexuality thing, that we need to have in old societies, when we didn't have, let's say, laws and police and stuff, we were living in small collectives and tribes. There was like a mandatory transition there, that you cannot just go and pregnate women and force them to do that. And you kind of, the group kind of took you through this process, or the group of men, so they can align you with the group. And so I think the problem now is that we don't have this alignment, because we have so big societies and we don't know where we are going. And so my question here is that, is it possible to create these kind of rites of passage rituals out of, let's say, thin air? And I love army, because that's the kind of, let's say, last frontier of like this connection with the rites of passage ritual, because we always had armies and some kind of warriors. But is it possible to, like in Sweden, just to create that? I do like these men manifesto, they try to do it. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think there are ways. I see, again, like as a martial art practitioner for quite a few years now, I see that, like especially within like martial arts, where you have like grades, for example, or belts, for example, or even without it, to be honest, like even if you do Muay Thai, there is a sort of definitely a hierarchy within each sort of sport, and which each club or whatever, where you're not able to earn the sort of credibility unless you're actually willing to put in the work. Like you can't go to a martial arts gym and just talk your way up. Like eventually it's sort of, it's like I think Mike Tyson said, like everyone has a plan until they get hit in the face, and then like you can't have any sort of ambitions unless you're willing to put in the work. And that's how you earn trust and credibility. And I see a lot of men, actually, especially in these settings that have been men without either a present father or a father that has been maybe even abusive in the sense of physical violence or hurtful words. So they seek that structure and sort of hierarchy somewhere else, where they can be validated for what they do. So I think men, in whatever way they find their way to sort of get that sort of affirmation from other, and especially older men. But again, these are men like it's a sort of confirmation bias. These are men who actually found martial arts or find a context where they could get validated. Apart from that, I think it's difficult. I see, unfortunately, I see so many of these Peter Pans, so to say, that they won't find these places because, again, they become limited. So instead they go out on the internet and sort of become avatars on, whether it's Fortnite or like Counterstrike or whatever other online sort of community, where they can still be these unlimited forever potential boys, really. So I think as a society, it's crucial for us to actually find these rites of passages, and also let men understand that until you have gone through it, you're still an eternal boy, to be honest. I think that's where we also need to sort of make perhaps women understand that men need to validate other men. just as women need to validate other women and allow those rites of passages to happen. Because I feel like so many of today's youth and generations are too coddled and too sort of sheltered, that they're not allowed to sort of fall or risk. But that's how you, again, pick yourself up to sort of take on the responsibility.
Maybe I will just say one good thing about these games, that there can be kind of this, let's say, pseudo rites of passage ritual, like in Counterstrike and in stuff, that you have to kind of compete against other men, and you have to be skilled, and you have to learn how to communicate inside the game, because it's like tactics game. So, but still, it's not like really embodied in that sense.
No, but you're right. Absolutely. I'm glad you corrected me, because yes, there are definitely rites of passages in that sense. But as you mentioned, they're not as embodied, even though they're very much in place. Yeah. So you're right.
Because I have played like thousands of hours of Counterstrike myself. I'm not saying that that's a good thing, but at least it has, because I remember that when I was a teenager, I was raging in the game, like kind of like losing my nerves when I lost. But then when I started to compete with the other group, I had to learn how to control that rage, to kind of to communicate more better, and if I wanted to succeed in the game. But
that's actually, and I'm glad you pointed out, because that is actually the same sort of game that you play. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So what about this? If we go a little bit in the darker topic now, the war topic, and you talk about that in the other podcast with Paul, and I can link that podcast here if somebody wants to listen to that. But for me, I've been thinking about the war a lot, and when we have the rites of passage ritual, let's say in an arm, it's kind of a one kind of ritual, but it's still a game in that sense. That you are not really in danger. But now, when the whole situation in Ukraine started, and like I'm Finn, and we share border with Russia, and we have been fighting against them many times, and it's in our blood to kind of have this mentality that there might be a war. Yeah, it kind of, when the news started hitting in a couple months ago, and it like really clicked in me that is it so that the rites of passage is not complete when that there is not real danger in hand? That I mean that I have this feeling that now is the time that I have to really step up. That if the war is coming, then what? How should I conduct myself? How should I be in my relationship and in my family and in my work? That it kind of made me to kind of, okay, now it's the time that I have to really step up. So can you talk about like this transition from this?
Yeah, I think on a very fundamental level, men as a group are what we contribute to both our families, but also society, are protection and provision. And if you focus on the protection part, by default, like it's the men that has always historically been the ones who protect the family, the state, the whatever it is at stake. And I think just like you said, even in Sweden, like we are in total 20,000 people in the Home Guard. In 3 weeks' time, 10,000 people applied, because they, like you said, they felt that, well, this is like some real potential danger. I need to step up. I need to do my part. And I think that's the problem with, especially in Sweden. I think you in Finland, as you mentioned, like the war and what happened, it's just one generation away. It's very much present. I think in Sweden, we've been sort of damaged, in quotation mark, damaged by peace. So far that we don't expect bad things to happen. I use the analogy of Galapagos, the Galapagos Islands, who had their own sort of ecosystem completely closed off to the world until a ship comes and then everything changes. And that's how I perceive Sweden right now. And I think from sort of core male perspective, I think so much in society is not, again, like for real. There's no real stakes at hand until the real come hits you in the face, so to say. And that's where I think glad is the wrong word. I'm absolutely not glad that there's a war in Ukraine. So don't get me wrong, but I'm glad that people start to realize there are real consequences in the world for not taking things seriously, for not sort of adhering to that. Violence is always a constant. Like there's always been war, there will always be war. Not sort of counting violence or aggression or war into the equation is by default, you're setting yourself up for failure. So that is the first one. The second one is then, how do you deal with it? And I feel like a lot of, especially in Sweden, but perhaps even in Finland, to a lesser extent, since you still have, it's so close to you, is that taking away violence from the equation doesn't mean that it goes away. It just means that we're less good at dealing with it. It's like, allergy, for example. For a long time, they thought that, okay, taking away whatever you're allergic to will make it better. Well, it turns out it's the opposite. If you're allergic to milk, you shouldn't take away all milk, because that means you're even more oversensitive to milk. Instead, you should have a little bit every now and then so that their sort of immunity level goes up. And the same comes to violence and aggression. Like if you try to completely take it away from society, or how you don't know how to react when it really happens. And that's why I think for everyone, and especially men, since we are the ones who eventually have to face violence or the aggression, especially like, again, where this whole talk about male toxicness or whatever, what they call it. The only way to prevent a Putin is other men stepping up to him. And that is the sort of, again, the duality of that fire I mentioned. Like there's the potential for a Putin, but the only way to counter it is someone else who can use that fire for something good. And then having to deal with that within society, I think it's so important. And that's why, again, I think military service should be mandatory. I think, again, like, and even if you don't do it, try to find a way to deal with violence in your everyday, whether it's through a martial art or something similar, that you learn how to react under circumstances where you feel like your life is in danger. That, at least for me, has been that's why I still practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because even though I know it's practice, but when someone is trying to strangle you, it feels very real, so to say.
And so I love what you said, that like war is like a constant, war is a fact, and also violence is a fact of life. And I do understand that our society and we try to create these kind of places that where it's not like present in our life every day, and when it has been like traumatizing for whole nation, like in Finland, really much. But and then we try to kind of create those containers that in our society we don't have so much violence and war, but at the same time when we try to do that, when we can, it's really easy to forget that it exists. So it's kind of, I like that it's kind of that it's in our mind that this is a potential and it will emerge if we are not alert. And
absolutely. Yeah. And that again, I think the analogy of I'd rather be a warrior in the garden than a gardener at war, I think is quite good, in the sense of like, and especially for a man, I think Jordan Peterson had mentioned something along the lines of you should be fierce. You should find that sort of animal within yourself, but be able to control it. And I think as a society, you should always be aware of the potential of violence, but again, be able to also know how to react to it. Because again, like, for example, now it was COVID. People become herd animals the moment something extraordinary happens. Like within a week, all toilet paper ran out. Not because they needed toilet paper, but because everyone else was doing it. And that's, to me, is like, then you don't have any sort of resilience, to be honest, to be able to step back and not just react to your first emotion, which is always fear, because fear is the strongest emotion, but to also be able to relate to fear in a constructive way, and then just not like act out on it, because that's where you really end up in a bind. Like, again, I'm taking the analogy of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's like, if, for example, someone is trying to strangle me, what I shouldn't do is just strike out of fear, because then it will be even easier to strangle me, so to say. I need to also be, okay, how can I actually work within this context and situation in a constructive way that won't make me even worse? And I feel that if you're not able to work and learn how to work like that, you will always end up worse, because you're acting out of affection instead of like constructive thinking.
Yeah. So I would a little bit back down to the topic we talk about war still, and let's continue with that. And I would want to talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu
right
after this, but I have a couple of things about war still. So I've been thinking about this different between Finland and Sweden. And if you look at the history, then Finland has been like this buffer between Sweden and Russia. And before, when Sweden was conquering Europe, or I don't know how to pronounce it, but taking space from Poland and every.
Oh yeah.
The big Sweden. I don't know how to call it in Finland.
Yeah.
Ruotsi, like big when you were, and
the colonial time or whatever.
Yeah. So I was reading this book for my kid about the Finnish history, and the Finnish history is we have been between Russia and Sweden like 1,000 years, and we have been the buffer there, and Russia was attacking, and then we had then Swedish people. Sweden had lots of Finnish soldiers fighting their wars. So I think that this is kind of this heritage that we are the buffer here between bigger Sweden and Russia, and I have been thinking that in Sweden that you have a lot of let's say more healthier, let's say, economy, and you have lots of more music and artists and creation and IKEA and a lot of stuff which are like conquering the world. And you have this, and I'm thinking, what is the difference between Sweden and Finland there? So I think that's the difference, that we have been focusing more into being the buffer and living in the fear of Russia. And that have kind of trained our energy, that we have to focus on that and be kind of not stand up too much, and then you have, because you don't have to do it like so much, let's say, that's not so mandatory, that's why Sweden flourishes. And I can see that in your culture as well, that Sweden, they're more extroverted and kind of more lighter than Finnish people are really crumbly and this kind of and I don't, do you see this kind of process? Because I'm just thinking, that's my
it is interesting, because I've spent quite a lot of time in Helsinki through my work. I've been to Helsinki at least 20 plus times or something like that, and in various positions where I've been working. And yes, there is, as you said, like there's a more I would say a distrust, or not maybe distrust, but more a distance to what's not Finnish, so to say, because it's either Swedes are perceived as sort of intrusive because it's still like because of history, and then of course Russians being super intrusive because of history too. So there's a level of not distrust, but not fully trusting towards either or, which I understand from a historical point of view. But like you said, then I do believe that there also is that the tallest poppy get chopped off, that expression. And I think Finns have that much more, is that you are perceived as being very vocable. Like me, for example, when in the first times I came to Helsinki, as a Swede, and I'm quite extrovert for being a Swede, I'm trying to do this small talk, between the meetings, and like this chit chat, which was not appreciated at all. It was very much like frowned upon, and like why are you talking to me, and that sort of social, that sort of social rules are much more present in Finland, where it's like you speak if you have something to say. And to be honest, I like that. I that's why I love working with Finns. I always have, because you say what you mean and you mean what you say. There's not that much of like, oh, trying to sell stuff or whatever. It's just like, no, cut to the core, keep it to this business, and that's it. But at the same time, as you said, it doesn't leave much room for maybe, because a lot of creativity comes from dialectics, like bouncing off each other and like having wild discussions about things, because it's not until you confront someone else that you will realize, like now, for example, you mentioned Counterstrike, and I was like, but of course, yes, absolutely. That's a part, sort of a rites of passage. And that's how you sort of evolve the discussion. And I learn from you and you learn from me, but that needs to foster a sort of a container for also, being expressive. So I can definitely see that. And I do think that it's becoming a bit better. I see a lot of tech coming out of Helsinki, the whole slush and everything with coming, and I see how that's spreading out. And I also see like Estonian company, even though it's in Estonia, it's not finished, but Estonia is the little brother to Finland, and like with Bolt and so on. So I see there's definitely within tech, there's a growing scene. And I do believe that Finns, both Swedes and Finns have so much more in common than the opposite, so to say. I think a lot of efforts have been, a lot of emphasis has been about how different we are, but I see so much communalities, especially if you go outside Helsinki and Stockholm, where people are very much similar. Like,
yeah, and maybe it's just this Finnish image that we think about Swedes as an, let's say, a little bit more flamboyant way, and we are more like earthy, like maybe a little bit simple people, let's say. But these are this collective, let's say, stories that we tell each other. But I do really appreciate Swedish people, and I love that, because I'm really introverted as in my normal life. I'm not really enthusiastic, but I love being with people who are like really different than me, and I like Swedish people, because there's some kind of lightness of being that I don't have. And I used to be in this men's group where there was this other Swedish soldier. I don't remember his name. You know him. He's also bald and small.
Yeah.
From EMG. I don't know, with the beard. And he does.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm terrible with names, but
anyway, but I love being with him, and he was also really like tough guy, and he used to be in an army and stuff. But he had this lightness in him, because kind of this, and I like that quality of Swedish people a lot. But anyway, let's continue not yet to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I have a couple of things about rage still, and anger. So we have been talking about this, the rites of passage, and we have to kind of control this anger or find a place for that. So let's talk about the other aspect, that the passive aggressive aspect. What happens there, that when you don't have a contact with your anger and your rage, what happens?
No, that's what I see very much going on in Sweden right now, is that when you're being very, because again, aggressiveness is nothing bad inherently. It's nothing inherently bad, but it's become something that is sort of bad, because it's perceived as, again, since we want to take away everything that is about violence, aggressiveness is part of it, of course. And then when you take away that and you're being very firm, because again, being aggressive could be very much as saying, just no, like, no, I won't accept this, or I won't do this, or like you simple, not sort of put up with stuff. That needs a certain level of aggressiveness. But it becomes passive aggressive when you go along, at least, but you're sort of sipping out small negative comments about it along the way. And that's how I feel, especially here in Sweden with men, since they're not being sort of connection with their aggressiveness, or that they're allowed to be sort of connection to it, they're sort of complaining, but not enough to sort of make a difference. Instead, it's just like, well, I shouldn't have, oh, well, if I had been there, I shouldn't have done it like that, or just passive aggressiveness. And that just pollutes the air for everyone. And I think it's very, how to say, again, talking about aggressiveness, it's not being standing up on your own, but also for others, to be honest. So it's very much a sort of a coward's way of pronouncing your sort of that you're not satisfied with something.
And also it can come that like we talked about it, that violence and anger and rage, they are a fact, that they are in us. So that's not all we can be passive aggressive, but till the aggression has to go somewhere, and usually goes towards yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
no, definitely.
And then what happens? Then you don't care about your health. You will do self-destructive things, alcohol, drugs, neglecting of your physical body, and depression is probably one part of that. And it's kind of like you have this fire inside you, and it starts to burn your insides.
Exactly.
So because it's like, and I love that, and now I can like feeling in that fire is a fact. It's still there. It's not. Yeah. It doesn't have like motives in that sense. No. But it starts burning, and then
No, absolutely, and that's why I like the analogy of fire, because it can be. I mean, again, it's the sort of almost the source of life in terms of like without it we couldn't survive, but also it will kill us if we can't control it. And again, the passive aggressiveness is when people don't learn how to set limits for others and themselves, because if they're not able to say no, then why should they be sort of considering their own borders or limits? Like if for example, I'm working with, again, analogy. Let's say that you want to go out and drink every Friday, and for whatever reason I don't. But instead of saying no, because I don't want to sort of get that confrontation, which could be perceived as aggressive, I will tag along, but I will sit in my corner and drink and sob and complain about things instead. And that is sort of how I perceive as a lot of communication now. And I'm more thinking about the Swedish society, since I don't know Finnish so well, but where it's like you go along instead of just saying no, like I don't take this, that's it. And I because so much about the masculinity in Sweden right now is perceived as something bad. And then again, if you like, again, aggressiveness, rage, all that, even masculinity are given. And if you try to like dampen that fire, it was just, as you said, it will just turn inwards.
Yeah, and if we do a little bit dissection between anger and rage also, then I would like to have hear what you think about it. But for me, it's kind of that rage also, that's maybe more in the rites of passage, that you have to find your ultimate limit. And what's like kind of the biological basis for rage? That's rage, let's say, circuit activates in you when there is life and death situation.
Yeah.
And that's kind of in top of anger. That anger can be like a smaller danger, or kind of like you have to do so, say no or whatever. But the rage part of that's kind of the ultimate expression of your physical power. And for me personally, I didn't have a connection with my rage until I started doing this, let's say, self-help men's work stuff. And I remember that one situation, it was 3 years ago, maybe, I did a highest workshop with anger and rage. And I was like embodying my rage like fully. And after that, something like shifted in me. And it was really positive shift, that I have this connection that I can kill someone if it's needed. If somebody is like trying to attack my kid, I have this power or this rage in me, which will lead to killing somebody if it's needed. And it kind of gives me this calmness, which is like really weird, that after the intensive rage and feeling that I could kill someone, I look at it and it's a fact of me, and then I can relax. And then I've been way more calmer after that.
Yeah.
So
no, but I agree. I think that's again connecting to that fire and being like become aware of it. It's like, oh wow, there is this destructive or constructive force within me that I can tap into. And again, it's always been there. It will always be there. And I think once you connect to that, then you can start working with anger, but being much more laser focused with it. I think anger for me has been very much a positive source, to be honest, a way to sort of put in the hours, whether it's in training or at work, to sort of overcome challenges. Instead of succumbing to, a victim, I use it as a sort of source of becoming a victor instead.
So could you say something a little bit more about that you have been using your anger, but pinpointing it to something? How does it happen? Because that's one first step is to have to connect with your anger and the rage that you even have it, because many men don't have the connection. But how does someone use that to kind of pinpoint it to something useful or creative?
No, I think both in my work, I've always needed to have a work where I can sort of create, and that's for me, it's been marketing. And then but marketing without sales, it's like, then it becomes useless. So for me in my work life, it's been about, okay, I'm going to prove first to myself, but for obvious reasons, the rest of my company, that I can take something that is a challenge and make it into something that is sort of positive. And I'm going to prove those wrong, or I'm going to prove myself that I can do it. And instead of seeing, because I often, when you feel that you're under a lot of pressure, it's almost like it feels like a mountain, like you see the top of the mountain, and you feel like, how on earth will I be able to come to that top? It feels unimaginable. But when you look 100 meters ahead for the first sort of pit stop or for the first base camp, you're like, okay, but I can do that. Like, I'm going to, by God, I will get it to base camp. And once you get there, you look at the next base camp. And that's just pure sheer force of will sometimes, because by God, I will do it while I break under it. But for every time you do that, you come to your own realization that if you put your mind to it and you use that, instead of pushing it inwards, oh, I won't be able to, I can't, it's too much, instead of like, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to. And then if it means that it will take 100 days or 10 days, I don't care, I will do it. But then you use that sort of anger in a constructive way. And I've used that across everything, whether it's been like my private love life, where it's been struggling, instead of just giving up, it's been like, no, I'm going to stick this out. I'm going to prove to myself that I can go through this. And that's not out of necessarily love for me or the other. It's just like, no, I'm going to prove this, and use that sort of negative energy as something positive instead. And
here comes like my, let's say, critic here, and this is not critic from me, criticism from me, but from the, let's say, the societal critic here. The critic towards masculinity here is that men are too much, that they just go forcefully towards something, neglecting other men, just using their power, just undermining other men. So can you talk about a little bit about that relationship between competition and cooperation between men? And let's start with that.
Well, I think both are necessary. And that's the thing, like whenever we talk about if you look into the wealth of people, like 90% are owned by men, or like at positions, 90% are held by men. But these are men, first of all, like possessions or like wealth is earned by a very tiny percent of men. And these are men who are willing to literally go over corpse to get what they want. The same is in sports, like the top, they literally have gone over, people's, like almost people's lives just to get to where they are. They wouldn't be there if they weren't. So I see there's like, to a certain extent, the whole of society benefits from someone like Elon Musk, who is just like, this is my way or the highway, but he paves the way for others to follow. It's necessary. Then again, I think this African proverb, like, again, if you want to go fast, you go alone, and then others will like eventually go after. But if you're going to go far, and that's where you get into thinking of society as a whole, you need to go together, because you won't be able to make it without others. And that's really, I think, for every man to understand, like, what's the purpose here? What do I want to achieve? If I want the family, I can't just be going off on my own and then like make everyone else follow me. It won't work like that. You need to get everyone on board. You need to make sure that, like, first of all, your wife is in on it. I mean, otherwise you won't be able to get to travel, but to also make sure that everyone is taken care of. And that's why it's so important. I think a lot of men, like you said, have that competitive mindset, but they apply it to everything. And eventually they will end up alone. So think, like, again, have a hard think whether what's the purpose of what you're pursuing, and make sure that when you get there, who are you going to be with? Because you might as well find yourself alone.
Yeah, so I do agree 100% that it's only a small percent men who, let's say, who embody this toxic masculinity kind of, and but it seems that criticism is like all men are like that the capitalism is built on that, but it kind of loses the whole picture that there is also the cooperation, and also inside the competition there are rules that you cannot just like force other people to do something. No. That you have to like produce something of that's valuable to other people if you want to go to the top of the mountain, be the ultimate alpha male with all the money. You cannot rise there but with just sheer power. But maybe sometimes in some places, like when you are a tyrant, that's possible, but that's really rare. Well, if you are with other men, they will like hit you down from that pedestal really
Absolutely.
easily.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you take Alexander the Great, for example, I don't remember the place where his army had been fighting for years and years. I think they were all the way to India, where they were like, eventually, like, you know what, this is it, we're done. And he held a speech where he completely just made everyone, okay, we still will follow you. Even though we know it's certain death or certain sort of illness, we'll still choose to follow you. And as you said, like, no one can get to the top without actually providing something of value to others. And that's why I think it's missing from the whole discussion between sort of, within quotation mark, male dominance, because there are even lesser few women who are willing to take that journey. I mean, the ones who do are tough as nails. Take Margaret Thatcher or Elizabeth, etc., Queen Elizabeth, I would say. Yeah, that's true. And also, if what Jordan Peterson said, it's really important to understand that there's an enforcement cost. But if you want to first enforce somebody to do something, it's really costly. As like you have to use a lot of energy to that. It's way more cost efficient to do a collaboration with other people. Absolutely. Yeah.
But so let's go to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu thing. So it's kind of let's say almost a meme sport today. Like lots of, if you are working with men or doing men's work or self-help, this whole world. If you're a man, there's lots of people doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And why do you think that's so? What's the reason for that?
I think, well, there are plenty of reasons, but I think that I can only speak for myself, but is that first of all, you can go all in without knocking each other out to start with. You submit, you tap out, and then you continue. Like there's always sort of, you can always go an extra round without it being, danger to your actual health. Of course, there are injuries. I'm not saying there are no injuries, but you can still go 100%. The second part is that there's no end to the techniques or to the potential of how to submit another person. It's just your fantasy that sets the limit. So there's always this sort of potential of continual growth or continual potential. And that is very much based on your own self, like how much work you're willing to put in. But also it connects to sort of certain level of nerdiness, I would say, because it becomes, you can, drill down to the very nerdy, or you can focus even more on the physical stuff. Regardless of which end you're at, you will still get enough to sort of to work with. So because in the end, it's like a human chessboard, and for every move there's a counter move, and for every counter move there's a counter move, etc. So I think there appeals on both a mental and a physical level. And then my experience is that since you get so extremely close, like physically close, there's also a border that breaks down. Because the guys that I've been rolling with, even though I haven't rolled with them for years, every time I see them, there's a big hug. There's a genuine trust, because you've sort of been physically close. It sounds like very banal or basic, but it is that simple. Like that border has been broken down. And I've been showing myself vulnerable. You've been showing yourself vulnerable, and we both sort of accept each other. So there's a sort of a symbolic sort of level to it too, I would say.
Yeah, and for me, I've been thinking about that a lot, and about the touching part of that. And first, I want to say that I do feel that that's really important to have a place where you compete with other men and exercise. That's like the first two things that's really on, but you are in the contact with your physical body and your limits and stuff. And then there's the social connection as well. But what I have been thinking about a lot about is the touching part, because I used to do before I was like 10 years ago, I was quite a hippie, and I was doing lots of hippie stuff. And we did this, they call it contact improvisation, or this kind of experimental dance workshops with my wife, and where you kind of just flow with your body and do these dances without the choreography. And they were really good. I liked them a lot. And you were touching other people and like with different parts of your body. And there was kind of this, when you were touching other people, it just feels good. So I was talking with one of the facilitators, and I said to her that I think the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu it's the same thing, but just for men. That it's okay. Then where is the place where you can really hug a man, when you can touch a man? There are
very few. Yeah.
But when you add that I will hug you, but at the same time I will try to kill you, then it's okay.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, because then there's also sort of a competitiveness that allows it to sort of happen. No, but I to me, and also I think, again, talking about the rites of passage, you have such a tight-knitted group, or you get such a tight-knitted group when you've been rolling around with each other. There's a sort of a container of trust there that people want to belong to and come back to.
Yeah. So I'm really a little bit missing that in my life. But I do lots of wrestling with my son, and who knows where it goes. But for me, it's like for my work, it's too dangerous to do that, because I have to use my hands every day and my legs. So it's kind of, if I pull a joint in my hand, then it's like I cannot do my work. So it's like a little bit difficult. But I do like that kind of idea, what you were talking about. It kind of connects you when you touch other people. It connects you, and it's like really this monkey brain. thing that it's not so difficult to understand. And when you touch other people, you are really close to do something with them. You'd learn to trust them, and it gives you like kind of a lot of good things into your life.
Absolutely, definitely. Yeah.
Good. Okay, good. So I think I have my all of my topics there like covered. So can you a little bit still talk about the EMG? You will do something in EMG. So first, for those who don't know what it is, can you tell that, and then what you do there?
So the EMG stands for the European Men's Gathering, and that's the annual meeting for the European Men's Gathering, men's movement, and it's in Denmark on Jylland, so the mainland of Denmark. And what I'll be doing, and what I did last year, is that we're doing a sort of rites of passage during the Friday, which is very much, again, like based on my own and me and Christian's own experience from both martial arts and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but also this sort of the hero's journey, in a way, put out throughout the day, where we force men really into the underworld, to dig into themselves, to connect to that fire of rage and anger, but also of creativity, and then to sort of, make it something positive. So there will be a lot of physical parts, or there will be a lot of sort of mental games as well, but also which together will also create a lot of emotion. So I think it's very, it could almost be overwhelming if you do it for the first time, but I think that the men who went through last year felt that there definitely was a sort of a before and after that day.
Yeah, I can definitely agree. And I like the way you did the facilitating that you were there, let's say the elder there, and you were facilitating really well, and I like that. So recommendation from me to
Thank you.
If you are even a little bit interested, you should check that out. And that's a really intensive. It's intensive process, but it gives you so much good things in your life.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Rickhard, and maybe I will see you this year. I'm not 100% sure if I'm coming, but I will see what happens.
Yeah, and I look forward to it. And if not, more than happy to see your countrymen come. We need more Finns at the EMG.
Yeah, I will try to do my best, and I will do a podcast with Paul and other people later. So I will try to advertise this event.
All right, great.
Okay.
Thank you for having me, Viljami.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers.